Hey everyone, my name is Mohammed and I'm your host for Freelance Canada, a show about what it's really like to freelance in Canada. Each week, I interview Canadian freelancers and industry experts as they get candid about the ever-challenging, always exciting, and sometimes hilarious aspects of freelancing. On the show today, I'm going to talk to Josh Garofalo. Josh is a SaaS consultant and copywriter at swaycopy.com. Since 2015, he has helped dozens of SaaS companies get more leads and sales, including clients such as HubSpot, Wave, Unbounce, and Hotjar. In this episode, Josh and I talk about how Canadian freelancers can build a successful business by identifying a niche that can help them stand out from the noise. So let's get to it. How about we first get started by getting a sense of what is it that you do as a freelancer?
I guess it's changed a little bit over the years, but currently I would say 90% of my projects is me jumping in and doing a fairly intensive research and audit project. So that's really getting to know their customer, their market, their competitors, their product, just as well as anyone on their team. And when it comes to their customers, I probably get to know them a little bit better than many of them because I don't have the same biases and blind spots that they might have. And the end of that project is a bunch of voice of customer documents that we can talk about if you want, and really a concise list of deliverables and findings. So not the traditional fancy sales deck and 100-page report that a lot of big consulting firms will put out. And then following on that would actually be me executing on some of the top priority items, which might be core landing pages, email campaigns, sales campaigns, things of that nature.
Got it. And how would you describe this as a title to somebody who is looking to hire somebody of your expertise?
SaaS consultant and copywriter. When I first started, it was just a SaaS copywriter because, as most freelancers, I mostly took orders at that point. Someone would say they need a homepage. I'd give them a homepage and not really ask any questions. As I've kind of grown in the industry, it's become more of a consulting gig where they might come to me with a set of questions or even propose solutions, and then I'll kind of turn the tables around and question them on that and figure out if that's really what they need. So yeah.
And you mentioned you are doing research and I guess market insights. What is the thought process behind that? Like, what is it that leads a company to invest in that, or for you to even turn around and tell them to put money into that before they do anything else?
The trigger is typically a website that isn't converting, an onboarding series that isn't actually getting people to use the product properly, sales emails that aren't working. And then they'll come to me and they're usually not actually looking for research. They're looking for that quick fix. Redo the 3 most trafficked pages on my site, and that's going to fix the problem. And so it's a bit of an education process most of the time where I have to show them that in order to solve the right problem and to actually solve it convincingly, when it comes to copywriting especially, it's important to really understand the voice of the customer. So how do they talk about their problems, their solution, or their ideal solution? How do they talk about your competitors? And then how can I organize all of that and bring it all together in such a way that whether it's me or someone on your team, you can pull from all of this organized and analyzed data that I accumulate through surveys, interviews, message mining, digging at competitors. How do we bring all this together and actually choose the right problems to work on, and then make sure that the ideal customer is reflected in your positioning and in your copy?
This sounds awesome. And how did you even get started in this business, or more specifically, what has been your journey so far? And what was your launching off point?
So it definitely goes way back. I won't go into too much detail on like the childhood years, but I mean, if I were to glance through those quickly, some formative moments would have been, I remember writing a persuasive essay to keep school uniforms out of my school. I remember writing a persuasive letter to my mom and dad to convince them to give me Nintendo 64 for Christmas. In junior high and high school, like I was known as the guy who wrote like love letters to the girls in order to get them to date me. And what a lot of people don't know is that I also wrote them for my friends so that the girls would date them as well. And then, I mean, I used it to get into classes that I didn't have the prerequisites for. I would reach out to entrepreneurs in town and get them to meet with me over lunch. And they would often end up paying for lunch because I was a kid and sort of give me some of their wisdom. And then it really kicked off, I guess, in university where I studied psychology and physiology. And the things that really got me going were like those psychology courses where we got into like, why do people make the choices that they do? How are those choices influenced? Those were the courses that really ticked for me. And then I guess my graduate program is what funneled all of that into my current direction. So it's basically like, actually, you're in Toronto, right?
Yeah.
So the University of Waterloo has a campus in Stratford. And so they had a master's program there that was kind of like an MBA, but focused on digital business. And so that's where I kind of cut my teeth and really started to think about startups and technology as where I might end up working. And then I guess after that, I got a job at a startup immediately after graduating. And it was there that I was tasked with writing copy for the website and some of our onboarding emails. And at this time, like most copywriters, I thought writing for websites and emails was like just one of many things that a marketer does. I didn't know that people can make like a really good living by getting really good at this stuff. And so it was in that journey that I found Copy Hackers and Joanna. And I don't know if you remember back in the early days, she would sometimes run some competitions on her site. And I won one of those, which got me a ticket to Las Vegas where she was speaking. And I worked up the courage to talk to her and I asked her what I should do next. And she told me to start a website. So I started a website, swaycopy.com. It looked a lot different. And by different, I mean a lot worse. When I started in 2015, it was just a cheap Genesis theme that I threw up in a day or two. And I had a job at the time. So really the goal was just to document what I was learning about SaaS copywriting on the job. And that was, I guess, the official launchpad. Those first couple of blog posts is where I got my first clients on the side without really trying.
Wait, you put up a WordPress website and you just got clients?
Yeah. So
What?
I imagine we're going to talk about this a little bit more. I don't think it's always this easy. But I think I did something that a lot of freelancers especially don't do. And that is I chose a niche right away. And so I called myself a SaaS copywriter on day one. And right now that's not a novel thing to do. There's, you get at least a few pages on Google for results. But at that time, there wasn't really any, there was people writing copy for SaaS companies, but no one had decided to call themselves like the SaaS copywriter. So I did that. I ranked almost immediately. And in my opinion, the posts that I wrote were fairly mediocre. But because they were focused on an audience, when these SaaS companies and the agency that works with SaaS companies came across my posts, they thought, okay, well, here's a guy who literally focuses on SaaS companies. I haven't seen that yet. Maybe he'd want to work with us. And that's where I got my first couple of clients on retainer. And that's shortly after that is when I quit my job.
Okay, there's quite a lot to unpack there. So
yeah.
You launched this website and you got clients and some of them turned to retainer and they quit your job. I mean, that just seems like such a dream. It's one of those things where something out of like the Entourage episode where it's just like everything just works out. It's like, okay, yeah, now I'm a movie star. So let's dive into the part about you saying that you're a SaaS copywriter. How much of that was intentional versus it makes sense for me to call myself that and kind of just be a result of just exploring?
It was quite intentional. Not because I thought I was going to land a bunch of clients right away, but I just thought it would be a good way to stand out in a noisy space and maybe get some readers on my blog. That was kind of my initial goal. Because when I looked around at copywriters, especially once I knew that was actually a thing, there weren't many that said they wrote copy for a specific niche. They were just copywriters who wrote all types of copy, including things that I would call more content like blog posts. And they would write it for anybody who was willing to pay them some money. I mean, throughout those high school years and even junior high, I was always interested in business. I was always reading business books. So this idea of actually choosing something and focusing and trying to stand out versus the market probably came a little bit more naturally to me than someone who falls into freelancing. So it was quite intentional. And then once I started to move it towards it actually being a business, there were lots of good reasons to actually double down and stick with this whole idea of being the SaaS copywriter.
And what is it about, I'm going to call myself SaaS copywriter that just felt so obvious to you?
Yeah, I mean, for one, I was working at a SaaS company. So I wasn't doing a Google search like which niche is the most profitable copywriting niche, because I know people in all types of odd niches, including like the pet accessory and food industry. There's copywriters doing well there. I would never think of that. Really, SaaS is what I knew. And then when I dug a little bit deeper, especially when I was starting to think about whether or not this was going to turn into like a viable and sustainable business, and these clients that I got weren't just a fluke, certain things definitely stood out. SaaS companies are a little bit unique in that you know that they have money, and you can kind of even know how much money they have, because whenever they raise money, it's a PR spectacle. So I knew at that point that I was going to be dealing with companies that if they push back against my pricing, it's not because they're like a mom and pop shop that literally don't have the money and they wish they did. It's because I wasn't doing a good enough job of explaining the value that I was bringing. So that's a good problem to have. And then when I thought about where a lot of these SaaS companies are and where I am, a lot of them are in the US in high cost of living cities, and they're used to paying super high salaries. And so again, I figured that would probably make them a little less price sensitive, especially when I'm a Canadian charging US dollars. And then, the industry is growing. I'm dealing with businesses and not individuals, people who are a little bit removed from each dollar that they're spending. They're thinking about ROI and not like, oh, I worked so hard for that $2,000. Like, I don't know if this is where I want to put it type thing, right? They're willing to experiment. So all of those things kind of work together to make me double down on this.
Right. You also mentioned that as part of this, finding your niche and then being able to bring on clients quite quickly and then bringing them onto retainer and then quitting your job, I guess, walk me through those stages and what happened through that process.
So zooming in on that point where I'm still working and I'm also taking on these clients.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I get that a lot because it sounds like it was just a dream, and It did work out really well, but there was some key things at play there. Right. So we already talked about why they found me and why they probably felt compelled to reach out. And that's because in a sea of sameness, I stood out as this person who was focused on companies just like theirs. But the reason that I was able to do things like ask for them to agree to a retainer, for example, ask them to pay a rate that most freelancers most definitely don't start at. These were not Fiverr rates. These were very healthy rates where with these two retainer clients, I was going to be doing quite a bit better than I was even at my full-time job right off the hop. And I would actually still be able to keep my job for a little bit, which I did. So the reason that I did this, and I think this is one of the biggest mistakes that freelancers make, is that I had leverage. I had a full-time job and I was happy there. So when you have that type of leverage, when you can afford to say no, for one, you show up to every sales call much more confident. Two, you're able to actually ask for what you need to make that opportunity compelling. And I'm not afraid to share at that time. These aren't rates that are insane by any stretch of the imagination, but at that time it was insane to me. I said I needed 100 US per hour. I was charging per hour at that time. And I needed at least 20 hours commitment from each of these clients per month. And we were going to do that for 6 months. So right there, I was at a startup. I was employee number 5 or 6. This was much more money than what I was making at the time. And I still had a ton of free time to take on more work. The other thing that I would say, just to make sure, because I don't like it when people paint such a rosy picture of freelancing. That first year and a half with these retainer clients was difficult. The one client was just difficult to work with. Probably not who I would choose to work with today. We just clashed a little bit. The other client was actually excellent. They were an agency that worked with SaaS companies, loved everyone on the team, but it felt a lot like a job because I had to follow their processes, which I completely understand. Like, that's the way most agencies will work with a freelancer. So that was tough. And there was still a leap of faith. I'm sure if they decided to cut our retainer short, I wasn't going to take them to court. I couldn't afford that. And I didn't know that there was going to be more work coming in while I was working with these two. It could have been a fluke, but it did work out. I worked with both of those clients for about a year and a half, respectively. And I don't think I've had a slow time since. And that was 2015. So it did all work out lovely, but I did some things right. I prepared in a way that many freelancers don't.
And for you, what did that preparation look like?
Well, it was choosing the niche. It was having a salary coming in so that I didn't need to say yes. It was actually keeping my job while I was working with clients in the early days to build up some extra savings. And I mean, those few things right there are things that a lot of freelancers don't do because they buy into this whole idea that I'm just going to quit my job and then I'm going to figure out what to do. And then it's all going to work out. And I'm going to be working on the beach within 6 months. And that's just not the way it works. I mean, I would look back at 2015 me and say like, what a rookie. He sucked at that. But I mean, if you look at the entire market at that time of SaaS copywriters, I was already quite good because it was a fairly new idea. So that's the other thing. A lot of freelancers will actually quit before they even know what they're good at, before they're actually really good at anything that's a marketable skill. Mm-hmm. And they quit before they know exactly what they want to do and who they want to do it for. So I checked a lot of those boxes early. I had clients lined up and it wasn't a sure thing, but it was as sure as it was going to get for sure.
And you mentioned that as you had those first 2 clients, then you started building up more. Were all the other clients also interested in a SaaS copywriter, and that was like the core aspect of business development, or did you step out of that SaaS copywriter niche at all?
I always stayed within the SaaS copywriter niche. I haven't moved from that at all. If anything, I guess over the last 2.5 years, it's been a process of making sure that people see me as a SaaS consultant first and as a SaaS copywriter, I guess, as a close second. As I've been able to get better at this thing and I've seen inside a bunch of different companies, it's important that people don't think that they can just come to me and ask for 500 words on a landing page. You're going to get a lot more out of me than that, and you're going to pay for more out of me than that. So I guess that's been important. But yeah, I've always stayed very close to this niche. I've always made sure to hang out where SaaS companies and other complementary service providers hang out online and offline. I've always made sure that if I spot a SaaS company, especially a startup, having some questions that I can answer, that I go out of my way and I try to answer that in far more depth than other people would be willing. I don't do that as much now, but especially in the early days when I was just trying to get my name out there, I was giving away a lot of solid advice and work for free. Not because they would pursue me, which I would caution against. If you're new and a prospect reaches out to you and they want free work, I don't think that's going to work well in your favor. They're going to take control of you and you're not going to get anything out of it. But if you see an opportunity where someone in your proposed niche has expressed a problem that you feel like you have valuable input and advice on, rather than give them the typical 2-liner that someone else might give them, put some time into it and you give them a full page, maybe record a video or some audio, go above and beyond, especially if it's in a public place like a forum where some of your future customers might be, because that way you're solving their problem. But then there's dozens of other people who might also have that same problem. They can't possibly expect you to do it for them for free as well. So that was definitely a key way that I kind of got my name out there and brought in more leads.
Right. That seems like a good way of how you were able to not just market yourself to your prospective clients, but also create this reputation for yourself within that niche as well, too, which I think a lot of times freelancers don't really think about. And since then, as you've been growing and now you're sort of shifting yourself more towards a SaaS consultant versus a SaaS copywriter, what has been the driving change behind that repositioning, essentially?
I would say it was opportunity, really, that I became aware of through the copywriting. Like I said, in the early days, someone would say they need XYZ. I would give them a price for XYZ and I would do it. But as I saw inside more and more companies, several dozen by now, I guess, I started to kind of pick up on the fact that what people were coming to me for weren't always the biggest issues. And so I was, for one, providing less value to my client than I could have if I were allowed to go in and solve the problems that I knew were there. And two, I was making a lot less money per client because they thought they just needed this small thing done. But by digging around, I realized there was a lot more that should be done, more important things oftentimes that should be done. So I saw some money left on the table. And the other thing is, I would always do a condensed version of what I would do now in this initial research and audit project in order to write copy for clients. And I started to realize that, yes, all this voice of customer data, some of these interviews and review mining and things of that nature helped me write copy, but it also provided a ton of value for them. Like their own marketing teams would take my work and produce copy on their own. They would find ideas for features and blog posts and new pages that they might need to add to their website in order to address a sub niche or something like that. The value of the research that I was doing, even though it was condensed, extended beyond just me executing on XYZ that they came to me for. And so I'm a big believer that if you're providing more value, you need to charge more money. That's just fair. And it's just good business, right? So yeah, it was gradual and it was me learning on the job. And I'm sure that now that I'm doing this research and audit project and then execution later, once I've done this for a while, I'm sure I'm going to start spotting some other opportunities to add more value. And when that happens, I'll adjust like I did before. And hopefully it goes just as well as this transition has.
I think when, at least for most freelancers, when a client comes to them and it's like, hey, I want this job done, it's like, yep, okay, I'll get it done. And, you mentioned you had that experience in the past as well, too. At some point, as you started recognizing there's an opportunity to provide more consulting services, be able to provide this research and insights to the client to not just write new copy, but actually look at the overall market, overall product, overall customer engagement, all of these different pieces. So what was that transition like? The client came to you, it's like, hey, I need these 50 articles. And you turn around, it's like, hey, why don't I do some consulting work for you instead? I feel like that could get a little awkward. I guess what I'm trying to understand is, how did you turn those clients that are coming to you for a copy into clients for your overall consulting work, especially in those early stages?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it was actually just like a flick of a switch. I just decided on a project that I was going to do it. But behind that, again, goes back to this idea that I had leverage. I knew that I could pitch this idea. I could name a healthy price. And if they said no and they decided they didn't want to do business with me at all because I kind of derailed what they came to me for, that was okay. That's the base. You've got to at least have the freedom to test in order to find these other opportunities. But yeah, it was really, I had this idea. I decided I was going to test it, separate out this research and audit from the copy. And the way that worked is I had a client in, I believe it was 2018. 2017. I don't know. Everything's blurry now, but pre-COVID times. Yeah, I had a client come to me and it was the typical, hey, Josh, we're going to revamp this website. We need you to rewrite these pages. And I decided this might be an interesting opportunity to try pitching this idea of starting with a research and audit and then executing on this website, maybe, but maybe some other things as well. So what I did is, rather than bake the research into my copy like I always did, I separated it out. I kind of went through how I would actually extend this so that I could do this properly the way I would want to because I'm getting paid separately for it. I named a price, which at that time I believe was $10K US. And that was, among other things, interviewing customers, customer survey, message mining, organizing all this data, pulling out some insights and some deliverables that we should work on. So they actually said yes. They thought that was a really good idea because they felt more confident that we were actually going to tackle the right problems and that I would actually know their business and their customers inside and out so that I could actually do a good job. And so that was the light bulb moment. It worked out. They paid the 10K. I delivered the research. And then what I did is, with those deliverables, the homepage, I believe there was a product tour, pricing, and then I also showed them that there were some onboarding emails that we should probably work on. I charged my regular rate for copywriting that I used to bake research into it. I charged that just for the copy after they had already paid a good amount for the research and the audit initially, and they said yes to that too. And so at that point, that's when things really took off for me because now, for most clients, I was getting paid really well for a research and audit project, and then I was still charging the same for just the copy on subsequent projects. I know you didn't ask this specifically, but when I think before I made this change, I was probably sending out 30 to 40 invoices a year. So, lots of small projects working with a lot of clients. Now I'm probably sending 10 to 15 invoices per year while making significantly more money. And that's because each client is investing a lot more money in me now. I'm able to go a lot deeper with each client. And it's kind of self-perpetuating. Once a company has invested this much time in somebody, and once you have someone who really knows your customer and your product inside and out, when you have another need, you know who you're going to call. You're going to call the person who's already done it, especially if they have gotten you results, which is usually the case.
That's awesome, to say the very least. And what has been the mental shift for you? Like, we talk a lot about, okay, here's the dollars, here's the exchange. Now I have 15 clients versus the 30 that I did before I made the switch. What have been some of the changes you've noticed as a result of making this shift in how you approach your business?
So I was quite honestly working at an unsustainable pace for the first 2 years, for sure. Definitely before I made the switch, just pulled in too many directions, too many clients needing small one-off projects and me having to take that on in order to make the type of income that I wanted. And that kind of held me down a little bit. I probably could have made the switch earlier if I had even more money saved up and I didn't really need clients. I guess the main shift that's happened is when we're able to go deeper with a client and charge a lot more money, it just creates space, I guess would be the easiest way to describe it. So I have the space now to explore a little bit, to go down a path that doesn't bear any fruit and then shift and take a look at something else for a client without thinking about like, oh, shoot, I just burned a bunch of hours, because it's all kind of built into the price. You know, clients are paying me enough now to be able to explore a little bit more, to dig, to make some wrong turns, to take my time. I don't need to get project out by the end of the week. I'm typically working with a client for 4 to 8 weeks, sometimes more than that. And the pace that I'm working at, we already talked about how dollars have gone up, which is great. But the other thing is the pace. So I don't work weekends as often anymore. I do still work the odd weekend. I definitely take time off now, whereas in years 1 and 2, it was hard for me to take time off. Whenever I would take time off, I would just be thinking about the money that I wasn't making. It's in a healthier place now. And to be honest, it would need to have happened. Otherwise, I don't think I would still be in business. I probably would have gone back to the workforce if I always had to work like I did in years 1 and 2.
And the place where you're at now and the path that got you there seems almost, at least on the outside, very much like the ideal scenario for at least for most freelancers. Just like, I put up a website, I got clients, and then I quit my job, and then this one client came along and I charged them more for these 2 other things that I was already doing, and they said yes. And then it's like I take in less clients and I'm getting paid more and I have a lot more freedom. And that just seems like such the ideal case. Not to say that there haven't been hardships along the way, which you touched on as well too, right? How can other freelancers think about picking their niche or aligning what it is that they're good at with what the market is looking for and willing to pay?
So I guess before I get into that, I guess a good disclaimer would be that I completely understand that some people are forced into freelancing, whether that's a disability that the workplace isn't willing to accommodate, an illness, or sudden loss of job, inability to find work. That forces you into freelancing, and I have no experience with that whatsoever. I understand that if you are forced into it, a lot of these choices that I made are quite difficult for you, and you're kind of forced to toil for not the best clients and not the best rates just to make ends meet. So that wasn't me. So when I got started, I had money in the bank. I had a spouse who was also making money. And while I'm not comfortable making $0, well, she does all the work and makes all the money. I knew that if this didn't take off, I wasn't going to lose my house or my car or anything like that. Worst case scenario, our savings rate would decline a little bit for a few months until I found another job. Right. So I think that's important to put out there. But there are, for every person who is forced into freelancing, I would say there are several who choose to get started before they're well equipped for it. And so it sounds kind of harsh, but I have given this advice to some freelancers who have reached out and they were quite thankful for it. And that is, if you're not sure who you would want to serve and what you'd want to do for them, it's probably a terrible time for you to start your business voluntarily. You should probably work for companies or for agencies. And first of all, get good at something valuable, but also figure out who you like working with, who you don't like working with, what type of work you like to do, what kind of work you don't like to do, and what are you actually really, really good at? Like, where do you get all of your compliments from? Collect a salary and build a network and have benefits and figure out what skill you're going to bring to the market as a freelancer and exactly who you're going to serve, and then launch your company. I think that is the best way to do it unless you're forced into it. And like I said, if you're forced into it, I have no experience with that. There's probably better people to get advice for on that. I don't think it needs to be a big mathematical multi-step process, because I think freelancing and consulting is the place to go once you have gotten really good at something for somebody. I think it's a terrible place to learn what you like to do and who you like to do it for. And I guess if you want to pull that back to like fundamentals, if you think about any other entrepreneur, do you start a restaurant that just serves food and drinks of all kinds for everybody? Or do you start a restaurant because you want to serve this type of cuisine in this approximate price range to attract these types of clients on this street? Or do you start a clothing store not trying to create clothing for a specific somebody? No, you launch your business when you know what you want to do and who you want to do it for. And I think it's the same for freelancing. I just think that because the barrier to entry is so low, you get freelancers that think the cost of starting this business and figuring it out or failing is almost zero, but it's really not. It's wasted time and it's wasted salary. If you spend 2 years not really getting anywhere as a freelancer and not necessarily paying all of your bills and accumulating debt, which is not unusual, that is an expensive failure that probably could have been avoided. Whereas if you worked those 2 years, got that salary, learned on the job, accumulated savings, even landed some clients before you quit your job, you'd be in a much better place 2 years from now than that person who started ill prepared. That aside, some of the things that you'd want to look at once you've decided what you want to do and who you want to do it for, make sure they actually have money and a need for it. You're not going to sell your services to somebody who doesn't need it. Make sure that these people are readily available. Make sure you have a good idea of exactly how you're going to get in touch with these people. Ideally, you would say, well, I already have a network in this because I've already worked with people like this in my job, and so that won't be too hard. But if that's not the case, at least have a really good idea of where these people hang out online and offline, especially once this coronavirus business is under control. Figure out where they hang out offline as well. And just make sure that there are other people serving them. I don't recall there being necessarily SaaS copywriters when I got started, but there were people like Joanna Weeb at Copy Hackers who were doing work with SaaS companies and getting paid well for it. So that told me that there was space in the market. I didn't see the fact that there were other people doing the work as a bad thing or as competitors that I had to crush. It just showed me that there was actually, money in this market and a future for it.
I thought that was awesome. Thank you. What are your thoughts now on somebody looking to get started as a SaaS copywriter? You mentioned that now everyone knows what being a SaaS copywriter is. So how can people, or at least maybe in this example, copywriters who are thinking about getting into SaaS and they have the expertise, what should be their focus? I suppose like narrow it down even more to be like B2B SaaS copywriter for fintech companies, or perhaps you have some other approaches on how they can explore their niche now.
Yeah. What will often happen when I talk about my journey, which as you said has been definitely favorable compared to what a lot of freelancers experience, is there is nothing magical about SaaS. So just make sure that you actually want to get involved in SaaS and that you have some sort of interest or background that lends itself to SaaS. And you're not just getting into it because you think like it's the place to be, because it's not. It's just one of the places to be.
Right.
So assuming it's what you actually want to do, you want to stay on top of industry news and developments in SaaS because you care about it, I guess I would recommend new freelancers today in the SaaS space do what people do in most markets that have matured to some extent, and that is go a little bit deeper. So in 2015, it was enough for me to say that I was a SaaS copywriter to stand out. Now, if you say you're a SaaS copywriter, you're on page 5 of Google, and you're just one of many from all over the world who are calling them that. So that's not good enough. So maybe focus, like you said, it could be on a specific niche. I know some people who have done exactly that. They focus on fintech, or they focus on SaaS marketing companies or some other industry that they focus on. And that's one way to specialize. I'll never know as much about fintech, for example, as someone who spends all of their time on fintech. And
Right.
so they should be able to win some of that market from the people who I guess would be considered more generalist in the space like me. The other thing would be to focus on deliverables. So there's people who will do just white papers or just onboarding or just sales emails or outreach emails for SaaS companies. That would be another thing, because that person is going to be able to refine their process, their little slice of the pie, better than I ever could, because it's just one of the things that I do as a SaaS copywriter who dabbles, or I shouldn't say dabble, but I focus on emails and web pages and landing pages. And so I can't focus as much on email as someone who only does email. So that would be another way to stand out, and I guess you could say steal some of the business from somebody like myself. I think it might be a mistake to just launch as a SaaS copywriter. It might be too late for that to be enough, but I'm open to it if people want to give it a try and see how that works out. You can always narrow your focus a little bit more later, which is another thing, like choosing a niche. We've talked about how my business in 5 years has changed trajectory a little bit. Choosing a niche is not a life sentence. You can choose it. No one is paying attention to you, really. So you can choose it. And if you don't like what's coming of it, choose something else, or go a little bit deeper, go a little bit wider. Experiment until you start having those sales conversations that you want to have.
I think that's amazing advice for those looking to get started. And I think this is also a good point for us to start looking to wrap up. So before we do, I'd love to know where people can find out more about you and your work online.
Yeah, so my website is swaycopy.com. If this whole idea of choosing a niche is something of interest, I have a completely free email series that I wrote because I was getting tired of answering the same questions in Facebook groups over and over again. So it's free. And at the time of this recording, there's not even a sales pitch at the end of it. You'll continue to get any other emails that I send out, but you can get that at swaycopy.com/freelance-as-business. So kind of a play on SaaS, software as a service.
Right.
And then social media wise, at swaycopy on Twitter, and you can look me up on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Josh. I really appreciated learning from you. Well, that's our show for today. If you liked Freelance Canada, then be sure to subscribe to our newsletter by visiting freelancecanada.fm. You'll get access to all of my personal notes, as well as book recommendations about the topic discussed in the episode. Now, you will not find any of this on our website, so be sure to subscribe if you don't want to miss out. As with most podcasts, you can listen to every episode through Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. It would mean a lot if you could leave us a 5-star review. It would mean even more if you shared our podcast with another freelancer so it can help them in their journey too. Finally, if you're tired of leaving money on the table because you don't know which of your expenses you can write off, then sign up for Benji. You can start your 90-day free trial by visiting betterwithbenji.com, because freelance life is better with Benji. Thanks for listening.